Brought to you by Capital One Business. When it comes to growing your business, sometimes you need more than financial investment. You need personal investment. That's what Jeff Plotner, Capital One Business customer and co-founder of Brackish, discovered after a unique groomsman gift in the form of a turkey feather bow tie grew into a successful men's accessory line. But when they were ready to expand, Jeff turned to his Capital One representative, Alex Parker, who wasn't just an advisor, but a Brackish customer. Because of the encouraging conversation with Alex, Jeff launched a women's line, scaling the Brackish brand to the next level. Because at Capital One, it's not just business. It's relationships that help you do more business. Learn more at CapitalOne.com/businesscards.
If you truly don't care about that consumer, they know it. And you really immerse yourself with that consumer as you grow. And if you do that, I think your odds for success are far greater.
Today on Your Next Move, navigating changing consumer habits and achieving sustainable success beyond trends. Joining us is Poshmark founder Manish Chandra. He helped build a social e-commerce marketplace that transformed secondhand retail and has 150 million active users to date. In 2023, the company was acquired for $1.2 billion. And inventor and entrepreneur Joy Mangano is here. Joy has developed the Miracle Mop, My Little Steamers, the Joy Hangers, and more. Today, she's the co-founder of Clean Boss, a non-toxic cleaning supply company which had 253% revenue growth between 2021 and 2024. Now, as we all know, consumer habits are changing fast. So how can your company shape them and capitalize on them? Manish and Joy are here to share their insights on understanding where consumer habits are headed for 2026, weathering trend cycles, and building trust with customers. I'm Mike Hoffman, Editor-in-Chief of Inc. Welcome to Your Next Move, produced by Inc. and Capital One Business. Now, Manish, Joy, welcome to Your Next Move. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So today we're going to talk about sort of changes in consumer behavior, both what you're seeing happening across the economy right now, and also how companies can drive changes in consumer behavior, which I think is such an interesting topic. And both of you have done that with your companies. So Joy, let's start with you. With your companies, Clean Boss and previous companies, what you've done, which is really interesting, is sort of reinvent staples of the consumer economy, bringing innovation to them and getting people to accept that innovation. Can you talk about your story, both with Clean Boss and with previous companies?
Sure. So a lot of people say, you made something and you showed it to me and I didn't even know I needed it yet. But it's, I've been an inventor since I'm a young girl blowing up toasters. And, I think innovation for me personally comes out of my own life. I believe I'm the ultimate consumer. So way back when I was a mom, I'm sure a few people have seen the movie Joy is My Life Story.
Oscar-nominated.
The Jennifer
biopic.
Lawrence, couldn't be prouder. But truly, through the struggles of, I'm a cleaning fanatic, obviously, came this first self-wringing mop. And oddly enough, somebody said there is no category, there is no industry for self-wringing mops. And then, there's 50 of them and there's a whole new stick good category. So many things I've done like that, whether it be a velvety hanger, nobody needs a velvety hanger, but it changed an entire industry as well, or things that come from my life and innovation, looking at things and saying, how can we make them better for the consumer? I am the consumer, I love the consumer, and that's how I function in business. And now, I always say, don't be afraid to start over, and I did with Clean Boss, which is truly my mission and the legacy that I want to leave in life is waking up the world to a new way of clean that's non-toxic, but has to perform better than those toxic cleaners. And we work on that every day.
And was there a moment, either early on with Miracle Mop or with Clean Boss, where you thought, oh, I've really got something with consumers, like they're responding to the new idea that I'm bringing to them?
Well, it's interesting. I'm in an industry, I appear in front of America live for 30 years now. I started when I was 2. And, and it was almost like the stock market, right? So I'd launch a product and you literally, those numbers are real that you see on TV. So you immediately know if they love it or hate it, right? That's not the time that you really want to know that. But obviously we do research before that. But the barometer is there for me. And so I've been connected with the consumer directly that way. But literally they used to, now you can do it on social, but they used to call and talk to me live on TV and say, I love this. Can you make this color? So even though we have shifted so much, the feedback is still there, the need for feedback and the ability to react to that feedback.
That's great. And so, Manish, you have Poshmark, which is the great fashion platform. If Joy has a product company, you have a platform company that you've developed. How did you get consumers to embrace the idea that this was a great way to buy and sell clothes?
Yeah, when we started, people didn't actually even have mobile phones that we think of as iPhone, Android today. And so we had a pretty interesting task, which is how to get people to even take photos. If you can imagine going back to 2011, girls did not want to take photos of each other, which seems so contradictory to the behavior we see today, where we have, hundreds of phones taking photos all the time. So we actually had to we hacked the whole system. We bought 100, at that time called iPhone video iPods, and gave it to our community. Then we used to host live events, which we called 5 at 5. Bring 5 clothes from your closet and take pictures and post them online. And then we actually started to host local events, which we called Posh Parties. Then we brought those events back into the iPhone app. And that whole process of iteratively teaching people how to take photos, selling, was the early phase. But what turned out to be really interesting is one of the artifacts we had was we allowed people to curate items from each other. So you could share an item from somebody else's closet on the app, another person could share that item. And that led to that initial formation of the community. And of course, the whole sort of process of iPhone photo taking, people exchanging photos and being able to quickly convert, say, a skirt or a dress into a listing and then sell it was one of the key drivers of how we remove friction in the early days.
And one of the things I think is so fascinating about Poshmark, right, is that the community has sort of developed, or maybe you've helped them develop, all these sort of rules and kind of like social contracts,
Yes.
right? There's like the idea of the 3-day rule or the 30-minute rule. And how did those sort of develop and come into being?
Well, they evolved a little bit by intent and a little bit organically. I think part of the thing of developing community is to follow the community where it goes and foster it. So sharing was sort of one of the early habits we created. We welcomed every single user when they first joined the app, which was easy to do when we had hundreds of users and thousands of users. And then as we were getting to hundreds of thousands of users, it became harder. So we launched a greeter program that we enabled one user to greet the others coming in. We would prompt them and say, hey, Jane has joined. So Mary can welcome Jane. And that became very popular in terms of how people connected. We also had local meetups. So people would meet locally and they would imitate what we were doing in our meetups. And so we would send them boxes of products that they could use to do local meetups. So there was a fostering of the local community. And then as people connected with each other, they would travel, fly, connect, go shopping together, go thrifting together. So that started to form sort of a national community. And then we fostered it by creating a national festival conference called Posh Fest. And that started back in 2013. And I remember 150 people flying from across the country to Las Vegas. And they didn't know who they were. And at the end, many of them become best friends. They've attended each other's weddings, et cetera. So a lot of that community building was very hands-on in the early days.
And how much for your companies are you able to drive consumer change versus taking that feedback? Like once you start to get the first bit of feedback, how do you strategically think, oh, this is how I can use this to iterate? Joy, let's start with you.
Well, that's a perfect example of what Manish is saying. He was listening to the consumer and it couldn't be a better name, your next move, right? It's, he was going, we all go move to move to move. Even though we try to think ahead, you still have to take it one step at a time. And I think if you're not listening to that consumer, if you don't respond to it, you miss so much. And for me, certainly inventing products. So he's got a platform that he's transforming. I'm creating product from, this doesn't exist, Joy. Can you do something, right? And that's out of thin air. You have to say, how can I solve that problem? It is a driver. It's a connection. And when it comes down to also in the end, the authenticity. if you truly don't care about that consumer, they got it, they know it. And you really immerse yourself with that consumer as you grow. And if you do that, I think your odds for success are far greater, far greater.
Manish, what do you think about that?
I'm thinking the same thoughts. That is, you have to learn to love to serve someone. If you're serving a community with passion, then you're listening to them, you're responding to them. But it's not that what they say X, you do X. You sort of listen to X, you listen to Y, and then from there may come a Z. That is the final innovation, which is quite different than what X and Y is. So you're sort of leading, responding, sometimes, taking a step back, which I have done as well, where you take something forward, you get a lot of feedback, you take a step back, and then you go in a different direction. So all of those things are really part of the journey. And sometimes you have to leapfrog. So for example, in 2022, we were listening to the community and there was a lot of innovation happening, and we launched live streaming. And initially people were like, who's going to buy on video? What's going to happen? Even though that's been around for a long time.
Exactly.
But it was really hard for people to imagine. And then suddenly, a year later, so many people came to us and said, this is the best thing. I'm starting to earn 6 figures, 7 figures doing live streaming, and it's taken off. So we had to kind of make a pretty big, bold move and encourage people to go on camera who've never gone on camera before. And many people have found that that's their calling.
Yep.
They want to be like Joy in a small way, in a small kind of miniature way.
Well, you say such, the pearls of wisdom, right, are, I call it, you have to shift your skis. I'm a skier. But when he was talking about take a step back, changing your direction, you really, if you do that, you absolutely benefit from that, because I look at the world, everything is a product. His platform is a product, right? And for me, inventing a product is a product, right? I when I walk, people look at and see colors and things, and I look at products. And so something may start out in my brain one way, but when I get to the end of that mountain, right, it's completely different in many ways. So you have to be able to shift your skis, is my phrase, or take a step back, and so that you're answering that consumer. Because today there is never been a smarter consumer, and never been a consumer that's so experiential with who you are and what you do.
That's interesting. Can we talk about the steps back or the misfires? Like, what are examples of things that, you tried this, you started to go down a path, and then you realized,
we don't want to talk about that. I'm kidding.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Manish, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll talk about something recently that we did. So in 2024, we were looking at a lot of innovation happening in the pricing of our platform. And Poshmark has had the same pricing since we started. So we charge 20%, seller keeps 80% of every sale, and then there's sort of a minimum of $295. And we were sort of saying, let's shift some of the the burden between buyer and seller. And so I thought a lot about it, and, I would take the full blame for it. But, we worked with the team and we implemented a new fee model. And beginning, we got some positive feedback, but very quickly, it turned out it was the wrong model. Yeah. And we sort of saw for a month how much stress it was causing on the platform.
And was this stress on the sellers?
On the sellers, on the buyers, on the revenue, everything. Like it was stressing out the whole system. And I had to go up, apologize to the community, and pull back that fee structure. And it was, a lesson in sort of how to deal with really major things, because the challenge of the marketplace is even micro experimentation with something that has a big network effect is harder. And so I think for me it is that if you make a mistake, it could be a big mistake, and you sort of go in and say, it was a mistake, and have the courage to pull back. And then today we still have the same model that we had 14 years back, which is actually amazing to have a marketplace which has had no change in fees for almost over a decade now. But that little experiment that told us how many things that are just working have sort of a bunch of cascading things that come together.
Like dependencies.
Dependencies, yes.
Well, I have to say, I have to have a winning hit every month when you go on live TV and you're bringing in millions of dollars of that product, right? So we try to get it right. But I must say, took a short amount of time for me to realize, you can build something and create something that's every feature and benefit wonderful, and what is the cost to the consumer? And for me, I learned very quickly that the definition of what I do is to create innovative product, but at the best quality, at the best value, right? So something may be $99, but in somewhere else, in another form, it's $300. So for me, my goal was always to make a product that would, make life better, but be a value. The quality of the product that you're getting is a true value. It's so hard. If you don't focus on that, you can go down those lanes and say, yeah, I love that. But if it's always at the forefront of my mind, along with how is this going to change somebody's life? And is this going to be a massive value for them when they get it and feel like it's great and I got a good value?
Is price sensitivity among consumers much higher today than it was, certainly during sort of the zero interest rate era?
I think to some degree that's true. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a bifurcated problem in terms of the core. But the core focus on value with the inflation sort of being still a factor is still there.
Mm-hmm. Joy, what do you see?
Yeah, so I think price sensitivity, when you talk about it, it's because the customer is curating more, right? When I was a little girl, the only person that delivered anything to my house was the milkman in the milk box, right?
Right.
Okay, well today, right, you're getting your salad, you're getting your coffee, you're getting, everything, and and so the consumer has changed, and I think they are able to navigate and compare, right? So you really are in a much bigger world of, what I'm offering. And I'm going to go back. It has to solve a need for them. It has to be experiential for them in the right ways. But for me as a consumer, I always feel great when I get something at a great value. And I think most people are like that.
You both have talked about experiential marketing, and whether it's in-person events or sort of the experience of watching someone on live TV. How have you sort of developed a philosophy around experiential marketing, and then how do you build that into your brand? Let's start with you, Manish.
I think experiences and connections are really part of the product experience. So when you think of a product like Poshmark, the community connection, sort of who you know is also in the community, what you feel about the company is all part of the entire experience. So for us, it's been about authenticity. So you can't really fake it. I think the consumer today, as Joy's talking about, is super savvy out there. Number two is, how do you embrace a very large world where there's diverse point of views? So how do you sort of take the conversation to a place that elevates it, but at the same time embraces everyone? So one of our core values is embrace your weirdness, which is all about embracing the uniqueness that makes you you. The third thing, which is there in these connectivity pieces, is how do you sort of bring different voices, different generations, whether it's a Gen Z working with a boomer together. So those kinds of connectivity requires you to constantly innovate. And that's been part of the evolution of these experiences that we've done. But I think the two things I would say is be authentic and be embracing of a much larger group of people, because over time, growth comes from bringing more and more people into your core demographic.
Isn't it? I think this is true that Poshmark actually took a while to decide to have a men's business and then got into it, and it actually was a quick success.
Yes. So,
and maybe a surprise success.
No, so we started very focused. We started focused on women's. We started focused on just fashion and just iPhone back in 2011. And by 2016, 2015, we were thinking of, how do you expand? And one of the simple expansion thing was, there's men and women in this world. How do you sort of embrace men? And I remember sending out a memo to the community saying, we're going to be launching men's and kids. Kids was no problem. But men's was sort of huge pullback. As if you're going to invite people who are going to just raid this community and mar this community. And so a lot of women send me an email, why are you inviting men to this community? What's going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, I remember one of my board members called me and said, maybe we should pull back from the men's launch and just do the kids launch right now. And for some reason, I was like, it doesn't make any sense why we can't have men's products. We launched it, and then I started to get complimentary emails from the community saying, oh, men are great. They just quickly come and buy. They don't ask very many questions. We love these men. And so I think sometimes you have to take that step and just sort of go on faith that, men actually do buy some fashion in America.
Sure. Joy, what do you
Otherwise,
think?
we'd be in trouble. Well, so, I think keyword that is on my pillow probably is authenticity, right? It's if you are not passionate and authentic about what you do. So me standing up in front of America for 30 years, when they look at the product, they look at me. And so, I think that consumer, you can see when you hear Manish talk about how he's incorporating, the feedback and everything, you have to. And you have to be part of that and create that community. And they know, so Clean Boss, I reinvented myself, and we want to wake up the world to a new way of clean. We want to take people away from toxic chemicals to non-toxic. But if you're going to do that, you have to give them a better proposition. And then you have to perform better, because we all use what our mom used or what our dad used, whatever, moms, I'm sorry.
Sure.
But, in cleaning. And so we have a mission, we have a passion, and for me, we have a culture that we actually, is, you never really, that wasn't at the top of your list as a CEO or a business leader. It now is, and the consumer is all part of that, and they feel that, and if you're not delivering that and they're not feeling that when they're buying the product, when somebody buys a product, or I'll be walking through an airport and they'll show me a handbag they bought from me and they'll tell me all about it, like I didn't know about it. And so I know that they are part of what we've created.
When did you have that moment of realizing, this is beyond me and I have to build a culture in my company that sort of supports this authentic and community-centric point of view?
Right. Well, the point is, when they're there and they are with you in this and they're rooting for you and they have ideas, and, it's like not listening to anybody around you is really what you can, make the analogy of. And as we say today, that consumer, so even the retail, brick and mortar, is, how they're moving ahead is they're thinking of experiential, right? How do you make brick and mortar more experiential, right? So, and that's involving the consumer, right? And I think there's everything right about that. When we do and research before we, my research could be talking to somebody, my friends, or it could be a very technical research, lab research, but if you don't do that and you don't incorporate the people who are going to be your customers, then I feel like you're missing the whole picture, right? It's so critical.
What about with Poshmark? How did Poshmark's culture come to be, and how did it bring both internal and external voices to the table?
Yeah, for us, I think because we are a community-oriented platform, the outside and inside ended up becoming very synergistic. So we had foundational values that, kind of evolved over the first couple of years, and then we codified them, which I think most of our employees can probably remember, which is, you start with love, lead with love, and money comes. So money is sort of always after love, which is really focus on engaging your customer. Number 2 is embrace your weirdness. Make sure that you realize you are unique and everyone else is unique, and you can be strong with other people.
Can I ask, just to double click on that one, is embracing your weirdness a weird vibe to have in the world of fashion or in the world of apparel?
Well, I think if you think of weirdness as something that is about really embracing all of us, when I look at you.
Or uniqueness.
Yeah,
Right?
uniqueness, but also just the fact that we all feel that we are a misfit in the world. Right? Like we look at each other, you look like a normal guy, I look like a normal guy, you look like a normal person, but inside we
But
feel
you're weird.
strange.
Yeah, no,
I'm getting that.
And we don't feel like we fit in. Once you recognize that, then it's actually easier to accept everyone else, because really no one is normal, to be factual. And that allows the embracement of a lot of different point of views. And then the third thing which is there is, as growth is very essential to what we do, but the only way you can grow is as a community. So that was sort of the third value. And the fourth thing is people matter the most, and everything else is subservient to that. And those values have, for some reason or the other, endured over a decade or more at Poshmark, and allow us to sort of keep inventing many things in that sort of broader framework.
Well, that's interesting.
Very smart.
So I'm curious, one thing that strikes me that is a theme between both of your companies is you both were able to change consumer behavior through your products, through your platform, but also you were sort of piggybacking on a much larger trend that was changing consumer behavior, right? So QVC and home shopping and sort of that was a huge change in the way that people bought products, and as well, like the iPhone and social media and the advent of social shopping was a huge change. How did you sort of, especially in those early days, learn the new technology or the new way of doing business that was happening, and how did you ultimately come to master it? Joy, let's start with you.
Well, so if you're talking about QVC and HSN, and now even TikTok, everything is
and live streaming,
live shopping, right? So I can honestly tell you the only class, and I prided myself on being a straight A student. The only class I ever cut in college was public speaking. So I always say God got me back, because how did I end up being an inventor speaking in front of millions of people every month? So it wasn't anything, it was by happenstance, truly. And if you saw the movie, you'll know it was, you think this product is so great, get on stage and sell it, right? It was a new, at the time, very new venue. I mean, it was something that I hadn't even heard of myself. And I guess when people say you are the queen of whatever, it's because it's like I'm talking about my children. When you are so close to what you do and you are developing something from sometimes just in my brain, right? Not even seeing something that triggered, we can make that better. I think it becomes very natural. And, even Clean Boss, the new mission and company that we're on, I don't even look at, we're growing so fast and we're looking at, there is a trend, right? The consumer is looking at what is safer, what is healthier, what is the right way, to clean it, not, but I don't look at it as growing in sales. I look at it as every time we have a bottle of our Botanical, the strongest disinfectant cleaner in the world, and somebody has it in their hands, a mom, we are taking away a toxic cleaner from that household. That's how I view it, and it's the legacy that I want to leave. And oddly enough, my founding partner is Pitbull, who is you would think Joy and Pitbull are, what is that all about? But his mother was a cleaning lady, and
I can imagine the sequel to the movie now.
Exactly. Oh yeah, it's even better. Part 2 is better, right? So, but he is very philanthropic, and he, along with me, this is our mission together. I mean, he's a fabulous, I can't sing and dance like him, but he's brilliant and and we together really want to do that. That's, like somebody said, how can you change the world? You can. You absolutely can, with a self-wringing mop, with a site that brings people together to have fashion in another way. And boy, do I have something that goes with fashion coming out. So, but you can do it. And I think everybody should know that, the beginnings of us, our careers, or what we did, and that's why Pitbull and I, he always says we came from the basement, right? From nothing. You can do it. You can do it. You just have to keep doing it, right? And you have to pay attention to that world around you, the consumer around you.
Do you have an anecdote from your early trips to the studio, to Tampa, where you suddenly had a moment of realizing like, oh, this is going to be a big thing. I'm good at this.
Yes.
Or I need to learn how to be good at this. How did that come together?
Yeah. Oh, there definitely was that moment. And it was like a double moment because, people used to ask my children, well, what does your mother do? They didn't know how to answer it. I was like this crazy person making this stick with a, cotton on the end, Anyway, so, I was that venue at the time, so it's, I guess it's like anybody going on live streaming for the first time or TikTok or any other form. At the time, if you can think back, hundreds of operators in front of me taking calls, and if like nobody rang the phone, if nothing happened, so it was a miraculous moment because to step on that stage, and I'll never forget, it was a stage that revolved, true story, and to be able to talk about something that everybody said, people aren't going to get it. And I'm like, they're going to get it. They're going to get it, right? And watching, there was a live screen up there to watch all of a sudden as I talked about the features and benefits and educated, and people understood what you were doing, right? Whether it be a site, whether it be a product, and to watch it just start ticking up to the thousands was probably a moment I will never truly be able to duplicate, except having my 3 children
Right.
in life again. It really, and it defined for me what I did. I invented product. I created product. For the first time, I felt like I knew what my path was for the rest of my life.
That's fascinating. Manish, for you, when you were sort of seeing, you were giving iPhones to early users and you were starting to see social shopping or live streaming become sort of a real thing, how did you foster that? How did you learn from that? And how did you sort of make that part of what made Poshmark so successful?
Sure. So, in 2010, I'd left my first company that I started, Caboodle, and I was thinking about what to do next. And one of my friends on vacation took this photo, and soon it was on a social network that was very popular then called Facebook. And so I was like fascinated. You may not remember it, but
Right.
it used to be and so you take this photo, and that sort of process, whereas if you remember in 2010, we would take a photo on an SLR, we would take out an SD card, we would put it in a reader, upload to a computer, and then upload the photo. And so that speed and velocity was very fascinating to me. And around that time, actually, a little photo app was being born that I was playing with called Instagram. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at these two things, it became clear to me that there's going to be a new way of sort of how to think about commerce, how to think about new apps. And that was the genesis of the Poshmark from a technology perspective. And then certainly looking at our closet, my wife will kill me for saying this, but they were like unopened shopping bags. Forget about, stuff that was new and unworn. So combination of that led to the creation of Poshmark. But the whole process of thinking that this iPhone or phone could do stuff required a big leap of faith back then, because people didn't have the phone. It was quite a limited device at that time. And so what I decided to do was for 6 months, give up my laptop and live my entire life on an iPhone. So fall of 10, I could do literally everything on the iPhone except for building spreadsheets.
Starting a business comes with its share of ups and downs, which is why staying true to your vision is essential. A non-negotiable for Romeo and Milka Regali, Capital One business customers and co-owners of Ross Plant-Based Restaurant in New York. Romeo and Milka took a leap of faith when starting their own restaurant, gutting an empty space and building it from the ground up. Every pipe, every wall, every detail. But building from scratch came with a heavy financial burden, which is when they turned to their Capital One business card. With the flexibility of the card's no preset spending limit, they were able to spend more and earn more rewards while bringing their vision to life. Today, Ross's success is proof that with passion and the right support, it's possible to make your dreams a reality. Learn more at CapitalOne.com/businesscards.
And so I even tried to do banking using the mobile browser, et cetera. And I was convinced that, if I could do 95%, this is going to be the platform. And that allowed us to bet on the iPhone in the early days. Yep. And that's sort of what leap of faith we had to take back in 2010, 2011, and find investors who believed in the fact that everything could be done on the phone and you didn't need a computer. Doing that allowed us to create a platform that was native to the phone before sort of that was important, made sure that everything was happening there. So when you had that phone, you could do everything. You didn't need to go to the laptop for anything. And that required us to design things in a different way. And because we had built that deep empathy by living our life on the phone, we could sort of say, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. So we had to do a lot of things that was very pioneering back in 2011. As we were going forward, the second big thing was distribution, because people didn't know how to look at phone apps. People didn't know how to get to a phone app. There was not sort of basic advertising. So it was very expensive to actually convince someone and market to someone. So that's where we came up with the notion of physical events and went out on a tour across Texas, California, Florida, trying to convince people that this is sort of the way to do stuff. And that we work with what you used to call fashion bloggers. In today's world, they'll be called influencers and creators. Exactly. And so we use a combination of sort of working with them. And so we were doing things that, are sort of very commonplace today, but they were very pioneering at that time. And the other thing we did was formation of local community groups, which became very grassroots in the early days and allowed us to both get specific knowledge about our product and what was happening, but also at the same time kind of evangelize out to folks. And then we had to take on many different things because the payment systems, the shipping systems, taxation systems were not geared towards what we were trying to do. Because the vision we had was that imagine you're a girl sitting in a dorm room. You came back from a party. You could literally turn around, post that dress on Poshmark, sell it, ship it, without sort of having to become a licensed seller or all of these pieces. So we had to take on many different challenges, from US Postal Service to local taxation to sort of how payments were working. And many of the systems broke, and then we had to build them back together. And I remember in 2013, we were challenging so many of these systems that none of the payment providers in America could actually service us. So we got progressively rejected by every single payment provider. And I was on a trip, and my CFO called me and said, I think we might have to shut down the site. And in that process, we had to fly back. And there was a transaction that happened. Braintree got acquired by PayPal, which was part of eBay. In that whole sort of transaction, somehow, miraculously, we got the approval to have a payment processing system that's been the
great.
foundation of Poshmark.
Wow, that was a real save the company moment.
Yes.
You know, that as an entrepreneur, that exemplifies that entrepreneurial trip. You might think, you know, when you go to Poshmark, to hear what the history there is, and I'm all about entrepreneurship, you know, throughout the world, not just here in America. And the steps, the obstacles, he went through them, right? And so if you believe in yourself, your next move, you have to keep moving, right? And I mean, I'm listening to that and I'm thinking I could be telling the same story in a different way. But I think that successful entrepreneurs have that similar story. They don't stop. They find another way. If you can't do it that way, there has to be another way. So I think that's fascinating. So proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah. So if the iPhone was a huge sea change and online shopping and payments, as you talked about, or home shopping and direct to consumer, obviously AI is one of the big sea changes of the moment. And how are you preparing your companies to integrate AI or address AI? How do you think about community and experiential in an AI and data-driven world? And how do you use it yourselves? And how do you use it as leaders?
Well, I want it to be 55,000 AI joys. Do you think that's a good idea?
Absolutely.
The 55,000x sales, right?
And well, of course you have to incorporate it. Every company does it in a different way. Where it might take me, I fly somewhere, we film a production for a commercial, a direct response commercial, right? For one of our products. And then you're watching these companies with technology, developing technology for us that they can pop out 50 different versions of me talking about product in 15 minutes, right? So you have to sit back and think, okay, what can I do with this technology in a good way, right? Mm-hmm. In a way that's positive. And so, I think it helps our employees in certain, so many ways for information gathering. And, I personally I haven't discovered yet the multiple ways, and you may know me a little bit already from that there are just so many ways yet even to come to enhance business and enhance the consumer experience and help them navigate through things.
I think for us, AI has been a game changer, and we've started to implement and incorporate AI into Poshmark for the last couple of years, and it's accelerating. So one of the big things is that we can really, at a deep level, understand your style preferences. And, if you think of hundreds of millions of products that are available on Poshmark at any given point in time, being able to connect you and curate stuff very specifically for you and recognize the changing trends that are happening is extremely powerful. We also can help convert an item into a listing and help you sell that. Understanding the product, generating sort of the listing, understanding the pricing, recommending pricing, all of that stuff is certainly a work in motion. I mean, it's still early, but there's a lot of work happening there as well. And then I think as a seller, working with your shopper, being able to communicate more effectively, do things that are helpful for the shopper, kind of like a seller's assistant almost. That's another role that AI can take. And then if you think from a consumer and a shopper perspective, AI can give you sizing help, recommendations, almost like a little shopping assistant, styling assistant. There's a company I've invested in called Alta, and they're building these mini avatars of you that can allow you to sort of get into shopping. So I think when I think of AI, I think of it as a massive wave. The velocity of it is much faster. I think the last time I can think of was when internet first arrived 20 years back is when the speed, I don't even think the mobile speed was as fast
Yeah, I agree.
as AI is moving. And, one of the challenges that comes in is, am I relevant for this evolution? And I think at every wave, you always feel that. And certainly as you get older, you feel even more, like, am I more relevant here? And you see a lot of these folks are like 20, 21, 22, creating companies and doing things. And I think a way to think about it is that if you plunge yourself into anything new wholesale, instead of resisting it, just sort of swim with it, that's, I think, the way to kind of embrace it fully.
Yes.
And the other thing I would say is that a lot of times there's a lot of fear around AI, whether it'll take away jobs or it's going to create, major challenges. Probably will create major challenges, probably will transform jobs. But I remember a visit to Pompeii, which is a city that was buried in Italy
Volcanic ash.
for 2,500 years.
Right.
And when you look at that city, or you go to Cairo in Egypt, which is, 6,000 years old, the stupidity that we did, the fallacies we had as human beings, the interests we had are exactly the same. So I think if our intelligence doesn't save us, my prophecy is that our stupidity will definitely save us.
Amazing.
Or end us.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned like thinking about yourself as a leader and relevance, and you've both gone through transitions, right? Selling your company, moving on to be, you in the fall gave up being CEO and are now a board member of Poshmark. And as you go through those transitions, bringing on and working with a partner with Clean Boss, I'm sort of curious, how has your role changed, and is it as energizing and satisfying? How is it different, and how does that make you feel as founders?
Well, it's, I think 30 years ago, when you're, growing a company, the first thing in your mind is not culture back then. Today, the first thing in my mind is building a company, so defining your mission, and then creating a culture that understands that mission and embraces that mission, because then the consumer knows and can make their decisions, and the community that you create becomes a very cohesive and interactive community. And so he has it visibly, right? And I have it through product, right? And so I think that, and as a leader, so as I've gotten just a little bit older in the last few years, I learned that the intelligence, the people around you, the talent that you bring in, when you start something, it's like, oh, my friend, I need packaging since she was a graphic designer. Let me ask her to help me, right? This is a very, very different world. And if you're going to grow quickly, you want to bring in talent that believes in the mission, is part of your culture, because I hire first and foremost for culture. And then we look at the talent, because there are many things you can learn, right? And so, and as fast as AI is changing things and everything, today as a leader, I less am involved in detail by detail. And I've been able to give up, to let go of some of that, to knowing and trusting the company of employees around me that are family now, right? So to speak. And I think that business in general really has to have that empathy in the world. I think corporate leaders have to have, it's not about the business. It's about, what is the business doing? Who is the business changing? What are they impacting in the world? And so as a leader, my brain is in a totally different, even though I'm creating product, my brain as a leader is very, very different today than it was 30 years ago, very much so.
So I think Joy talked about it. I think a lot of it is about letting go. I feel like in order to grow, you must let go. And, when you think about what are you letting go, to some degree, what you're letting go is parts of your ego, right? You're letting go of responsibility and this and that, but a lot of it is about ego. And what does that mean? It means really what you're doing is trusting that there's many other people who you can partner with to carry on your mission or even make the world bigger and better. And so to me, a lot of this journey has been about letting go and allowing sort of different energies to come in and different kinds of partnerships to come in. And of course, you can only let go if you're partnering with people you trust, you respect them, you build sort of long-term partnership with them. And so, for example, at Poshmark, the new CEO, Namsen Kim, is actually the person who was partnered with me when they were purchasing the company. I worked with him for almost 4 years now. So as we transitioned the company to him, it was easy to let go and partner with him and support him in the journey. And I think that is really the key thing, is as we embrace new things and look at new things, how do you let go? And to me, part of it is always continuing to keep your mind young and your spirit young and sort of looking at things from a fresh perspective. And one of the techniques I use personally is to listen to new music and new artists every week. So, you get your Spotify recommendation and, typically you look at the top 10 songs. They're like playing to your sort of core. And then you look at the bottom 10 songs, and they're weird and awkward. And all of it obviously listen to the first 10 songs, but then I listen to the bottom 20 songs.
You definitely listen to the weird and awkward. I knew you were going to say that.
Absolutely. Like last year, we had 1,100 artists on my Spotify list. So that's the key, is how do you sort of engage with the new? Because if you're just tied to what you know or what you believe in or what you hold, you're not able to evolve. And evolving is also evolving your identity and who you are. And that's been the exciting part for me.
That's great. That's great. So last question, obviously the name of the series is Your Next Move. So for each of you and for your companies, what's your next move? We'll start with you, Joy.
Well, easy and difficult to answer, right? Because we are launching a new product, which you're going to love for fashion, but it's expanding our footprint. Because as I said, as a business, the mission, you never lose sight of that mission, and it's to wake the world up to a new way of clean. And with the technologies today, if you really immerse yourself in it, you can, and Pitbull and I have said this, we can transform, a world where cleaning has a lot of, you're hearing about, this has something in it, don't use it now, right? And so our goal is to, my next move, my present move, my future move, and my legacy is to enable a young mom. Because when I was a young mom, I didn't have that choice, and it was very difficult. You locked your cabinets, the children, right? To make it a whole different world of product around you, certainly cleaning product and other things beyond that we know are good for us and will enhance us, but do the job that they have to do. You couldn't do that, 20 years ago, but as I say, with amazing technology, we can do that today, and we'll continue to do that. And for me, that is the move that I think the whole world has to make in some form or fashion.
Manish, what's your next move?
Well, I've just stepped out of Poshmark. So, specifically for me, I'm just taking a little bit of time off. And
Vacation,
definitely vacation.
I don't know the definition of that word.
I know. We need to spend some time to do that.
I guess.
I'm discovering the meaning of that. But working with a lot of young entrepreneurs. So that's sort of where I'm doing, spending some time looking at AI. For me, it's a little bit going hands-on. I've been so far away from actually working on technology myself that I bought a little robot, and I'm actually working on coding in Python, but not coding, using AI to code. So it's been kind of fun to discover basics of how to work with the technology. On Poshmark front, what we're doing there is really reinventing the app in a big way. So you'll see a lot of major changes in terms of how we are evolving and getting it ready for the next sort of 5 to 10 years.
Quick, and one little follow-up. The first-time founders that you've been working with, is there something about them that's different from or interesting compared with your experience?
I think the speed with which these founders are moving is extraordinary. I think the age is extraordinary. I think on an average, these founders are probably 25 years old. The teams are very small. And the speed with which they're able to scale revenue or users or whatever their core metrics are is extra. It's really, really extraordinary. Yep. I mean, one of the companies, I think they're up to millions of users in 4.5 months of their launch.
Wow.
With very little in marketing. A lot of it is product innovation. So it's fantastic to see that.
Terrific. Well, Manish, Joy, thanks so much, and we'll be back shortly.
Now, the most effective employees think strategically, solve problems, work collaboratively, and are results-driven. In short, they think like business owners. Today, Jason Krieger, VP, Head of Customer Management at Capital One Business, is here to talk about how leaders can motivate and inspire their team members to think like business owners. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
So as we all know, successful companies often became that way because they hired great talent. So what's the difference between being a high-performing team member and someone who thinks like an owner?
Yeah, it's a great question. A high-performing team member handles their tasks and responsibilities well and shares best practices and lessons learned with their teams. But someone who thinks like an owner takes things a bit further. They think strategically, they take ownership of outcomes, and they exercise a really high degree of next-level thinking.
We all know the concept of having too many cooks in the kitchen. So how do you bring team members into a decision-making process without slowing that process down altogether?
Let me give you an example from my own team last year. We started thinking about how to better structure the team, and we asked a host of questions, like should we structure based on products or geography? And how do we gauge success? And we divided our team of 60 people into groups of 5, and we gave them an MBA-style case study about the team, which gave them some parameters for restructuring. And then we asked each group to tell us how they would restructure the team overall. And after hearing from the teams, the actual changes were easier to get buy-in because we had the buy-in from that exercise. So I'd say don't be scared of creating places for feedback. People can accept change more easily if they know they have a voice.
And what are some ways to help your team connect their roles and their goals to the organization's bigger goals and bigger purpose? Why does that matter?
A frontline leader has to know a person's why, as well as what is on their vision board, and constantly connect their weekly work to those two things. A leader of a span of control has to connect the team's work to an emotional connection. And there are 2 ways I like to do that. So I like to talk about can't imagine a world without. And that is that our customers should say that about us as people, and about Capital One as a business. I ask them to think about products or companies that they feel this way about, and spend time thinking about how they're going to recreate that for their customers.
And let's talk about recognition. What role does recognition play in this process, and how can you make sure people feel genuinely appreciated for taking initiative or thinking beyond their day-to-day tasks?
Yeah, recognition is super important. And according to a recent survey conducted by Gallup, they found that employees who receive high-quality recognition are 9 times as likely to be engaged as those who don't. And the key to the Gallup research is that the question asks about recognition in a time-bound way. Have you received recognition in the last 7 days? That's really the key. And so recognition doesn't need to be over the top. A simple thank you for the work on that project last week, or I noticed a contribution that you made to XYZ today, is the easiest way to engage your employees.
Every company wants collaboration, right? So how can leaders truly facilitate collaboration across teams so people don't just stay in their lanes?
It can be good in certain circumstances to stay in your lane. For instance, I wouldn't be someone who should weigh in on our underwriting policy. But more broadly, I recommend that you identify 3 to 5 large core priorities each year with 3 to 5 sub-projects under each priority. This allows focus. Large priorities are led by senior leaders with sub-projects led by cross-functional leaders who usually bring in cross-functional employees. Almost every project needs representation from multiple teams to get the best outcome. And so modeling this team-based approach to problem solving is critical for senior leaders.
And for founders who are watching and who want their teams to care more and to take more responsibility, but they don't know quite where to start, what's the one practical first step you'd recommend for them?
Yeah, so delegating, in my opinion, is the hardest thing to do as a leader and the best thing for you. It's also the best thing for your employees. It's how they learn, and in turn, it's how you scale.
These are great insights. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right. So next up, we'll take a closer look at one of the key strategies today's guests use to their advantage.
What's really driving changes in consumer behavior? I'm Sarah Lynch, Recognition Program Director at Inc., here with Angela Lee for a deeper conversation about where consumer habits are heading in 2026 and how to build that consumer trust. Angela, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's talk about Clean Boss and Poshmark. What have each of these brands done really well to build trust and be authentic with customers?
I think that both of these companies are really good examples of keeping pace with current consumer trends. So if you think about Clean Boss, they're a really great example of value. They might not be the lowest price product, but they talk a lot about longevity and the fact that the products are really user-friendly. I think there's something really accessible about their products. And then on the Poshmark side, I think that radical transparency, if you think about really understanding where the products come from, making sure that they're trustworthy, they do a really good job of that as well.
So Manish and Joy really listen deeply to their customers and their communities. Why is feedback more critical than ever before? And how can brands really leverage that feedback?
So I think one of the things that's really hard about feedback right now is that the pace of feedback and the publicity of feedback is just very different than it was 5 or 10 years ago. If you think about a TikTok video going viral on a product review, that could happen overnight. And so my recommendation to founders is to get as much early feedback privately as you can early on so you can make those mistakes. But if you do make a mistake, own it and very publicly.
When it comes to finding that brand voice and really being authentic with that voice, what advice might you have for a founder or a marketer listening into how to hone in on that?
The 2 things I would tell a marketer is to first figure out where your consumers are finding you and talking about you, because the voice on Instagram is very different than the voice on TikTok. And then find out what customers are saying about you. I think a mistake that marketers, founders often make is they're like, these are the 17 product features. That's not how we talk to each other about products. We say, you need to buy this because. And if you can really articulate that because well and explain that in a voice that resonates with the customer, that's how you're going to grab their attention.
Can you actually give us an example of a company or a brand that really successfully evolved with changing consumer habits rather than just chasing trends?
I think that Dove is a really good example of this. Dove went from selling conditioner to selling confidence, right? If you think about what we thought about Dove 10 years ago, we really just thought of them as personal care. And now we think about them as a brand that really gets women. They're very inclusive. They make you feel good about putting on their products. And so they actually shifted what they were selling by really listening to what their customers wanted.
What are the best ways that founders can actually get that ear to the ground and really hear from their customers in the ways that are going to be most insightful in fine-tuning their brand?
As companies get larger, it's natural for founders to get further away from the customer. And the more that you can really try to stay close to the customer, whether that's by going to events, even literally like if you're doing a food product, a couple times being the one who's delivering samples at Whole Foods can be really useful to see how people interact with the product. And then I know this is a boring tip, but people are really bad at doing customer research surveys. And they ask incredibly leading questions, right? So if you ask the question, do you think Sprite is refreshing? People are probably going to say, yeah, I think Sprite is refreshing. But if you instead ask the question, use 3 adjectives to describe Sprite, you're going to get a much more honest, authentic, customer-driven answer. And the closer you can get to that, the better that you will understand your customer.
Looking forward to 2026 and beyond, I'm interested if there are any insights you would give founders, Angela, about what they should be keeping an eye on as far as evolving consumer habits moving forward into the future.
We often think about consumers in channels. This is how I communicate to them over direct email. This is how I communicate to them over Instagram. And oftentimes those roles are siloed in an organization. And the more you truly, I know omnichannel is a term that was coined maybe 20 years ago, and I think it needs to come back and really understand what does that holistic customer experience look like, and what does your brand look like from all angles.
Thank you so much again for being here with us today, Angela.
Thank you so much for having me.
Back to you, Mike.
And one of the goals of this show is to connect our audience with founders like you. So now it's the time in the program where we get questions from our viewers for your next move. And so the first audience question is this: how do you determine whether a consumer habit is just a fad or something that's more of a long-term trend? Manish, let's start with you.
I think if it pertains to something that consumer needs at the very core, it is likely to last. If it's something that's very temporal or just a variation on something, it's likely to be a fad.
Well, I don't work with trends. I love trends. I buy trends. But we are focused on our mission with products that are sustainable and will impact life for a very long term. So non-toxic cleaners, for instance.
The next question from a viewer is, when you think about consumer data, whether it's data that's generated within your companies or data that you get from another source, what data do you keep an eye on? What do you look at? And how does that inform how you operate? Joy, let's start with you.
Well, critical. So for us, it is something that we are constantly looking, especially when you're creating product, right? Because you're hearing what's missing, what I don't like, and what I want to happen. And it guides us many times.
Amazing. And Manish, what research do you look at or data?
So with data, I would say there's 2 ways to think about data. One is volume, which is sort of how we always think about data. How many things are selling or sort of what is the demographic that's adapting. But the other way to think of data is ratios. And ratios actually are much more sustainable and can be looked at when you have small amounts of data or large amounts of data. So for example, one of the everlasting facts of Poshmark has been that our average spend time of a user on a daily basis has been north of 20 minutes.
Wow.
So, that's a very useful metric because it's the time spent per user. And that's a core metric to keep an eye on.
Our next viewer question is this: how do you deal with tough customer feedback, one-star reviews, negative, reviews on social media? Do you look at them, and how does your company address them?
That is critical in product design. And we literally will change something in the future because of that, that we live, breathe, and eat those 5-star reviews, hopefully, right? Or not. So, and that's your feedback. That's your feedback of if you're doing it correctly and if you need to change something.
Great. Manish, how do you deal with complaints?
Yeah, I think you have to engage with all of the feedback. In fact, the bad feedback, the one-star feedback is super critical to the evolution of the product. I always say that hate is a form of love. Apathy is what you don't want to have. You don't want to have silence. If people are talking, that's a good thing.
Great. And so for our final viewer question, you are founders, but you are also consumers too. How do you find your own personal habits changing? And what does that tell you about sort of the nature of the business and the economy right now?
I can answer that because I think shopping is a sport. And so it's like, laying in bed, if I can't sleep, I'm just like, searching and, oh, I love that. I'm going to get that. Purchasing anything now, there is a whole vista of information that the decision becomes smarter. And that's why we have the smarter consumer, because they can really get themselves into many areas to make that decision a right one for themselves. And I think that's all good.
That's great. That's great. Manish, what about you?
For me, I think it's AI. In Barcelona, I walked into an ice cream shop, took a picture of the ice cream shop, and asked for the 2 flavors I should order. And that kind of speed is something I think will be part of the things.
Oh, you got my answer.
Consumers, it's powerful. It's like really, really powerful from that perspective. So I think we have to all adapt to it, but I'm kind of excited about where the world is going there.
Joy Mangano, CEO of Clean Boss, and Manish Chandra, the founder and board member of Poshmark. Thanks so much for being here today on Your Next Move.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We hope today's conversation shared some insights into trends that matter to your business. Join us next time when we'll explore industry disruptors, category-defining brands, and the strategies you need to make your next move. I'm Mike Hoffman, editor-in-chief of Inc. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Your Next Move.